So much, Kavya, and hello, everyone. Very nice to be able to interact with you online. I've got to thank first, of course, Cafe Mutual, Prem and his team to put this all together. And looking forward to the very brief session. It's a nice, interesting format, a lot packed into a short period of time. And I'm also very cognizant that the next speaker is somebody fairly illustrious, Ken Fisher. I was just telling Prem we have a room in our office named after him, so I'm not going to take too much time. But I've got a quick presentation for you, and then hopefully we'll have some Q&A. And the topic of my presentation was the importance of investment process and research. And it's something I hold very dear to my heart because that's something that we've invested a lot of time and effort in. And I'd like to just share a few thoughts around that with everybody on this call. So let me just share my screen for a second. Hopefully you can all see this. So the topic really was on process-driven investing, and the quick background to that. This is an interesting statement I came across by a very intelligent man, Mr. Edward Dimick, and he says, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. And this is so true, not just for investing, but for pretty much anything else in life, whatever work field you're in, whatever activity you're doing. I think the importance of building a process around it just improves your ability to be successful within that. So what is a process? It's really just a series of steps that are taken in a very deliberate sequence to try and ensure a more consistent outcome. You may not get the exact outcome that you desire, but it improves the probability of an outcome. And as I said, this is done pretty much across all fields, but two fields in particular which have made it a very important element of day-to-day activity that I must mention are on the left-hand side, you'll see flight checklists. So in the aviation world, the concept of a process or a checklist while, let's say, aviating is a very, very critical part of safety and ensuring consistency of outcome. So, when planes fly, you have a before takeoff checklist, after takeoff checklist, before landing checklist, after landing checklist. And the idea is to just ensure you've ticked off everything that was required to ensure a safe flight. The same for doctors. I think there's a wonderful book written by Atul Gawande called Checklist Manifesto, which again talks of the importance of putting checklists and processes in the day-to-day activity of a doctor. And that actually we can extend effectively even to the investment world. So when we talk about fund managers, all of us in this profession, for us as well, we're looking after the health and safety in a way of the wealth of our clients. And we have a very heavy fiduciary responsibility. This is not our money. It's somebody else's hard-earned money. And therefore, you have to manage it in a certain way. And therefore, again, the importance of a very detailed investment checklist before you do any activity is very critical. So the one thing that you will see this, and I would assume that most good fund managers will always do this, is before you do anything, any activity of investing or selling, you have to put everything through a checklist. That's mandatory in our system, and that's pretty much, I think, should be the norm in our industry. What does an investment checklist normally consist of? I've just put the very broad headings. There are lots of details within this. But let's say whenever we are assessing a company as part of an investment exercise, you have to go through the whole industry landscape, and there are a whole bunch of questions attached to that. You look at the competitive landscape, all the players in the segment, management, very, very important aspect, particularly in the Indian context, and I'll talk about it a little later. Then looking at all the risks and monitoring the risks associated with any investment is another very important parameter. It's not just the upside, but you also in our business have to focus a lot more actually on the downside. When we invest, we don't really, companies grow naturally. So we don't worry about how much return we can make as much as how much can we lose. And the first thing you have to do is ensure that you lose as little as you can. And then, of course, things like profitability, valuations, numbers, all analysts love numbers. So in our business, that's also an element, a very critical element that we have to go through. But this is what a typical checklist looks like. And as I said, there are lots of details within this, but it's almost mandatory that you have to tick off everything in your whole program of analysis to ensure that you finally arrive at an outcome. And this is one area where funds have a very distinct advantage. And here I'm wearing a bit of my marketing hat in terms of just promoting mutual funds. But the fact of the matter is, funds have a very distinct advantage over a general investor. And one of the biggest advantages we have as part of that whole checklist exercise is, as I mentioned, management is a very important element of that. And management access is probably one of the most critical elements of this whole exercise. If I go back in time and I look at some of the best investments that have emerged in our space, a lot of them had actually to do with a management inflection of some sort or the other. So if you think back in time, if you look at, let's say, TCS, it's when Chandra took over as the CEO that things absolutely changed. If you look at, let's say, Bajaj Finance, Rajiv Jain coming in over a decade ago just altered the entire strategy and the direction of the company. If you look at Ramesh Sokti, who came into IndusInd Bank, the whole company turned around after that. If you look at Varun Berry into Britannia, you look at Pratik Pota into Jubilant Foodworks, more recently Sunil D'Souza coming into Tata Consumer. So management changes, inflections actually make a big difference. And in our job, actually, this is one of the most important aspects to track. And this the fact that we have access to managements, because obviously they're willing to talk to institutions, definitely gives a fund a much bigger competitive edge. The level of conviction you can get when you talk to these managements is at another level. And really, that ends up being one of the key calls for you at these inflection points. The other thing that funds have a big advantage of is a research team. So we have a big team with sector analysts. They go out on the ground, they look at plants, they talk to dealers, they talk to the entire ecosystem, and a lot of that goes into part of our investment checklist. So just having those resources and a whole team around you helps you. I mean, no one individual can be able to track all the companies in the portfolio effectively. So you definitely need a very good research team around you, which a fund has the advantage of. And then, of course, in a fund system, you have organizational support as well as a lot of domain knowledge that you end up building up over a period of time. So that's where just being part of a overall institution really helps while you conduct your research and your processes and your investment checklist. And the most important thing, and this is literally my last slide here, but the most important element of putting a process in place is that you also have to have a culture of following the process. Just putting in a checklist and saying tick, 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 and this is all that we should do is not enough. It's very important that it becomes ingrained in the whole DNA, the culture, the way of doing things. And this is again, process culture is not necessarily relevant only for asset management companies or mutual funds. I think it is relevant for everybody on this webinar, whatever job you're doing, whatever company you're running, whatever activity you do. I think a process culture, the importance of taking things in a certain way is very critical to ensure a better and better outcome. Again, there's no certainty of 100% outcome, but it just improves the odds. So maybe I'll just very quickly describe to you what we've put on this slide. So for instance, just one example of what we do here to build that process culture is a concept of a Wednesday all day session. So today is a Wednesday, incidentally. And every Wednesday of every week, our team sits together in a room, and now a virtual room, from 9 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. in the evening, right throughout. We don't talk to the outside world. We're not accessible. This is our no noise, quiet day to think, analyze, run through businesses, and just talk about it. And it's so critical to find one day or even more in a week where you just are not in the in the middle of noise, and you're just focused on what your core is, and you have a lot of thinking time to assess how to do things better. So the Wednesday all day session, as I said, is a 9 to 5 exercise. It's a mandatory day, and for us this is probably the most critical part of our process and critical part of our week, where we all get onto the same page in terms of what we're doing and trying to improve the best possible outcome for our clients. Another thing that we've sort of built up is something called an internal database, a wiki. That's where, again, it's part of process. So what we've done is we've built a system where all the knowledge of our team, as we keep building knowledge, as we keep experiencing things, it all goes into a system. All our discussions, thoughts on companies, and the whole idea being, as time passes, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, people may come and go. Ours is a people business, but people keep changing. But how do you make sure you have a process that is institutionalized? And by doing this, anybody who comes in a future date can come back in time and see what the team was thinking at that point in time. What is the work that they did? What was the outcome of that? What is there to learn from it? So these are sort of certain elements that are specific to what we do as an EMC. I've written that right at the bottom. People come and go, but process lasts forever. In our industry, unfortunately, the way it's evolved, sometimes it becomes very personality driven. A lot of fund houses are identified with one person, but the fact of the matter is, it's always a team backing them up, and it's very important that that whole team has a process. And the strongest fund houses are those where people can change, but the process and the outcomes remain consistent for investors, because investors won't keep shifting with every shift in fund manager. So that's very, very critical. This has to become part of the culture of the firm as a whole, and particularly for the investment team. So I think that is really the key of what we are trying to achieve over here in terms of a process and a culture. And that's really the message that I wanted to send to you, just the importance of a disciplined process, and the culture of following that consistently is very, very important for whatever outcome comes from all the work that we're doing. So I've tried to keep it as short and sweet as possible. So that's where I will stop, and I'll hand it over to Prem for taking a few questions. And as I said, I think we've got a very interesting session coming after. So over to you, Prem.
Hey, Anup, thank you. That was very short and sweet. And you did emphasize on how professional fund managers go about managing the money of their investors. There's a due process, it's vigorous. And however, I wanted to ask you one question. How important is the role of the individual, the fund manager's judgment? Because process seem to imply that there is almost some kind of an automated response to situations. So where does judgment play a role here?
Sure. So there is, of course, finally somebody has to take a call as an outcome of all of that. But again, the idea of a process is that by the time it comes to the point where you have to take a call, you have put it through as many filters as possible, improved the probability of coming out with the right outcome. So that finally, at the end of it, the judgment really taking was maybe choosing between certain ideas that have been filtered through that entire process. And that's where the judgment comes in a bit in terms of should we buy this business. And sometimes, management, you have to do a judgment on management's, for instance. It's not easy to quantify the capability of a management. So sometimes that also plays a role. So the fund manager is important from a judgment point of view. There's no doubt about it. But the fact of the matter is that pre getting to that stage, there's just a lot of boxes that you have to tick. It's not like I like this guy, so let me just invest in it, or we like this broad company, or this is working in the market, so let's go and invest. As I said, this is not our personal money. We're a fiduciary. You have to back up everything that you're doing with a very clear logic and a lot of work. And you got to just be a little away from the market while all this is going on, and finish it, and then make the appropriate investment. So I won't say fund managers don't matter at all, but I think this does a lot of the job for them to ensure that they're able to take the right calls at the end.
Okay, okay. So I get that. Anup, you've been involved with many fund houses. You've had a terrific track record in managing money. I wanted to know what is it, the advice that you would give your grandma uh, on how to invest.
Sorry, the advice
Because
give to
what is the advice you would give your grandma? Okay, because she doesn't understand investment
my
processes.
grandma. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, my grandma. Okay, fair enough. No, so listen, this is a business where you got to, when it comes to equities, and I'm talking about equities because obviously that's what I've done most of my life. I think the best thing really, typically, I mean, if it was my grandmother for sure, is that all you have to do essentially is uh, you have to be optimistic in your temperament. Temperament is very important part of investing. I think just like people running a business, if you're running a business, you run a business, you don't start thinking your business is going to shut down tomorrow. You believe it's going to grow. That's why you run a business. And the same way when you invest, you got to be very positive of the ability for companies to create value. So one is just having the right temperament to be able to hang through all sorts of volatile phases. And B is obviously just making sure you're selecting the right companies or fund managers to back. And then actually the lesser the activity, the better off you are. Then it's a matter of just patience. But if you do that work up front, and again, that's a process in a way, if you just do that up front, then there's very little that you have to do later on. And again, the probability of your outcome being good is very high. So yeah, I guess that's what I tell my grandmother. And I don't think she'd be, the older you are, probably the less volatile you will be. So I don't think ideally you would want people to be shifting around too much. But yeah, I guess that's really it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anup, for being with us. Wonderful to have you here. And all the best to you, Anup.
Thanks so much, Prem. Thank you very much.
Kavya,